just identity is actually a big problem. Are you actually who you claim to be, right? I got an email that says you're somebody, or I get a text that says you're somebody. Are you actually that person? That's a really big problem. And I think AI is going to actually make that easier for bad actors to trick people into thinking it is correct, because now you can have a discussion with them. Oh, I don't know what you're talking about, right? Maybe it's hey, your Netflix account's going to be canceled. You got to click this link and pay. You're like, if you don't know what that is, you're like, no, I think I paid it. Oh no, it shows here on, account, blah, 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 date, blah, blah, blah. You still owe, blah, blah, blah. You must pay now, right? You can start interacting with them, and you may get a more convincing, realistic response back that could confuse you or cause you to do something that you ought not do.
With all the data in the world, there has to be a way we can use it to benefit our businesses, right? This week on the podcast, Avetis sits down with Kevin Marcus, the co-founder and CTO of Versium, an easy-to-use suite of data tools powered by the industry's leading B2B2C identity graph. Kevin is passionate about unlocking the full potential of data and has interesting insights as to where businesses can utilize data to their advantage, as well as the potential dangers of having data and AI in the wrong hands. Let's dive in.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Tech Leaders Playbook. Today, I'm really excited to have Kevin Marcus, the co-founder and CTO of Versium, a marketing analytics company. Kevin, thank you for being here. Welcome.
Hey, thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it.
Kevin and I spoke probably about a month ago, and we talked a lot about data, and it's an important topic. And we're going to tackle some of that stuff. We're going to tackle AI. But most importantly, Kevin, tell us about your journey, man. Where did you get started, and how did you get to this point in your career?
Sure. Well, if you really want the beginning, when I was a little kid, my dad used to, he did work with military contractors, and occasionally he'd take me down to the office, when I was 10 years old or whatever. And I just really liked typing on the keyboards on his computers. They were, 1980s computers and whatnot. So I just always thought it was really fun. Occasionally he'd bring home they called it a portable compact computer. Compact was acquired, I think it's now HP, but went through a couple acquisitions. These were not portable. It was like 30 pounds, tiny little monochrome screen in it, a floppy drive, all this kind of stuff. And there were a couple of games, I'd play those, and then, because you're a kid, like, I want to make games, that sounds really fun. So, I picked up some books and started learning how to program in BASIC, actually.
Nice.
This is, again, early 80s. So there was not a whole lot of online resource available to figure these things out. It was basically a bookstore. You pick up a couple books, go down and just study on them. And that was that. But that was really the genesis of how I got into computers in the first place. It was really just typing. How sad.
Oh, cool. By the way, I was cleaning out my parents' garage on Saturday, and I found a old AOL floppy disk.
Oh, excellent.
Remember, you used to get free internet for about a month, and then they would convince you to keep it for another month. So
Yep.
I thought that was interesting. So you started very early just with the passion of computers and pressing buttons, and then you got into gaming on it, and then eventually learned to program in BASIC, which is highly recommended for folks starting out, especially back then. Till now, I've heard it's still a really good place to start. When did you get into your first professional programming position? And did you start in databases? Did you start in the application, front end side, the back end UI? Where did you get your start?
Yeah, so it's actually kind of interesting. So while I was in high school, I actually picked up a job at a local computer shop. So back then, they had basically importers would get all the parts, and then you put them all together, put them in the box, set the jumpers so everything would work, all this kind of stuff. And so that was kind of where I had a first real job, again, high school, but it was literally building these computers, and then we would set them up. So, we'd put some basic software on their DOS, maybe a spreadsheet or two, something like this, and did that just for these little computer companies. It was great fun. I don't remember how much I got paid, but it seemed like a lot of the hour. I think it was like $6 an hour or something, so you're like, wow, this is awesome. Yeah. Well, back then it was, right? And all your friends were making $4 or something. So I was feeling pretty good about that. But then, eventually went off to college at the University of California, Riverside. And while I was there, and I actually tell this story in an entrepreneurial class that occasionally I give a lecture to while I was there, I became very interested in antivirus software in particular. And so I actually went and started sending emails out to the different vendors I could find. There were maybe 20 of them or so worldwide, let's say. And I literally just emails, hey, do you guys ever hire, interns over the summer, college interns, this type of thing? And literally sent out 20 of these things. I got one response from one person, and all it said was, yes, we occasionally hire interns, period. That was it. And so I'm like, all right, well, I'm going to go back to doing something else, because that fell pretty flat on its face. But some months later, that same individual actually reached back out to me, and he said, hey, we're coming to the time where we're getting close to bringing the interns on. If you're still interested, send in a resume, and why don't you come on down here and take a look? Now, I assume you know a little bit about the geography of SoCal. So Riverside is where I was living, for school. And then basically, if you go all the way over the coast, you're kind of in Santa Monica area, which is where Symantec was. And so this first sort of summer gig was at Symantec working on Norton antivirus. And did that actually for 3 years, believe it or not. And one of those years brought a whole bunch of other students with, so we could all go and build, we called them virus definition files, or basically the code that's required to detect the virus on the computer. And so the thing that was most fascinating about that was, at that time, all this stuff was very low-level coding. I mean, you're in assembly language basically all day. So I became extremely intimate with not just the low-level bits inside the computer, but also, how all of the operating system, DOS at that time, how it works and how it interprets all that stuff. So just as a learning kind of thing, that was absolutely fantastic, because you really get into what is the value of a bit, what's the value of a byte, how's all this stuff work, and was just an absolutely wonderful experience to go through at that time.
That's amazing. What a great opportunity. I mean, you talk about taking a risk, sending emails, right? This is not something people enjoy doing. They apply to jobs when they're ready and they get what they get. But you created your own your own vision. You created your own kind of reality, and you ended up working at a very, very successful company, probably the leader in that space. Symantec till this day, they're still very relevant, but it's amazing. And then how did you get into leadership?
Yeah, so that's an interesting one also. So unfortunately, I did not take a job with Symantec or any of the other antivirus vendors when I was done with college, because as we were discussing before the show, I was doing some work looking for email addresses, mostly for people that I went to high school with, right? I mean, that was like the genesis of that whole idea is, hey, I want to be able to communicate with these people that I went to high school with, and how do I find them? The internet was just coming of age. This is mid-90s. And so there were no real resources to be able to do that. So I started doing some work just on servers at the university to start building this service up. And I got introduced to many people that were actually in that sort of space. In the process of that, I found a startup that was actually here in the Seattle area, which is where I am now. And that particular startup, because, it's small, you're laying the foundation for lots of things. I had lots of foundational skills that I had just learned, including down to the bit level stuff and hardware, and essentially joined this startup just as a, Joe engineer. But over the course of some years, continued to grow and expand, and was given opportunity in that business to be able to really exert some leadership and essentially help manage a team, which I found very quickly. I just don't like managing that much. So usually I find other people to do the actual management, but the high level sort of, visionary type of things, which direction do we want the boat to go? That I do like to do. I do like that a lot. And I think I'm pretty good at it. So that's usually what my leadership looks like. Is here's where we're going. We're taking that mountain. All right. All you guys, line the troops up and let's go.
And that is leadership, by the way, Kevin, right? If you're not a great manager and don't enjoy it, forcing yourself to be a manager is honestly a disservice to you and the folks that you would potentially manage, right? So a smart person knows their strengths and weaknesses. In this case, your strength is the vision, especially from an architectural perspective, I'm guessing, and the road mapping. And then you've hopefully hired great people along the way to take care of the leading, managing, holding people accountable piece, which not everyone can do and wants to do, frankly.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the sort of, hey, identify the things you're not good at. I've got a list of things that I'm not good at, right? Sales is another one. Like, I don't mind doing like the technical evangelism and things like that, but, I can't sit there and pick up the phone all day. Hey, would you like to buy, widget 1 for $10? Like, that's just not me. I don't enjoy that at all. And it's really a big struggle. So again, anytime there's some sort of something that requires that, it's like, let me go find somebody else who enjoys doing that, is good at it, and let's see, can we make something work out there? But big fan of the comment you made there. Find people that essentially complement, your superpower.
That's what I do here all day, and in life too. I don't know, Kevin, if you know the book. Oh God, I forgot it. It's Who Not What, Who Not How. So finding the right who's in your life that can get stuff done that you either don't love or are not good at. Even if you are good at it but don't like it, you should find a way out of that eventually, right? So you could play to your superpower.
100% agree with you on that.
In this case, your superpower is clearly programming. It's the product vision and all that stuff. What's the most challenging position you've had? Because from what I see here, you've been a CTO several times, right? InfoSpace, Intellius. I remember Intellius, and now Versium. And you're a board member. So tell me what's a very, very kind of technical, challenging position you've had, both from a technical or people perspective or product perspective, whatever you want to go.
That's a great question. So I'll actually roll back to, believe it or not, the Symantec time. And this is where I learned a really important lesson about big companies in particular. Back then, I had one of the way that would work is you'd turn on your computer in the morning, and it would go and run the antivirus scan. And so that's, essentially that was how everything would work for people, back in that day. And the antivirus scan in Norton Antivirus at the time would take like 3, 4, 5 minutes for just to scan your computer, scan your memory, all these kinds of things. I had gone and created a pretty simple algorithm. It was more or less a heuristic to say whether or not it needed to run certain scans in certain areas of the computer and sped this up dramatically. It would take like 10 seconds instead of, several minutes. So I took this and went to my boss at the time and I said, hey, I've got this great improvement. Here's how it works. It detects 100% of the same things. It's just way faster. What do you think? Why don't we throw this in there? And I got the, no. And it's like, okay, why not? And the first response was, well, because, I'm the manager or I'm the guy running that and we're not going to do that. And I just kind of like step back. I'm like, God, why are we not making this better? This really is bothering me a lot because it's already written. It already works. It's at least tested by me. We could put it in a product and test it, make sure that's not breaking anything. Why would you say no? Why wouldn't we do that? Now, as it turns out, I later found out and some years later when I got smarter or whatever, the real reason was because they'd already passed certain milestones and changing this code would have required, some regressions and things like that they didn't want to do. But at that time, I got really, really frustrated. And actually, that was a big part of the reason why I did not end up going back to work at Symantec, just because it was like this company at the time, despite giving me these fantastic opportunities, they were not actually trying to do what's best for the customer. Or I had that opinion at that time, despite it, again, now I look back at it, I get it. But at that time, I was very frustrated with that. And it was very difficult to sort of understand why would someone do that.
That's great. And as a leader, our job is to not say, because I'm your manager, because I said so, but we got to educate our folks on why. I think someone as smart as you could have handled the actual truth. Ideally, it'd be nice if he allowed you to create something and make it go faster. And to even if you were wrong and you figured out, it was a great lesson for them and for you, but unfortunately a lot of folks lean on the fact because we've never done it this way, because we've always done it this way, because I'm the manager, because I said so, because we can't. Nobody wants to hear that, right? You're not going to retain your top people by just saying just because, right? We've got to educate, just like kids. We got to teach our staff like why we do certain things, even if it's not a beautiful story. We got to be honest and sincere. So that's a lesson right there. Tell me about. I heard somebody told me that you created one of the first internet email databases ever. Tell me a little bit about that without dating you too much. That's pretty unique. How did you do that? And I have a feeling I know why you did it, because you were trying to find people's email addresses, right? That was your whole journey. But tell me why you did it and more about what it is.
Again, we're going way back here. So again, this was in college. And essentially, I wanted to find, people that I went to high school with. There was no Facebook. There were no, I don't even think Classmates was around. None of these types of services were available. So I just made the assumption that, people that went off to various colleges, they would have emails at those colleges. And most of them don't have directories. Even today, you can't like say, hey, who are the students? There's no service that gives you that type of list or anything. So I went back and said, well, how can I build something here? And as I mentioned already, I'd emailed all these antivirus vendors, and I found them, believe it or not, through Usenet. And Usenet, way back when, actually was the equivalent of almost like the equivalent of Reddit. It's just like forums for everybody that they can go talk about whatever it is they want to talk about type of thing. So I started really simply with, let me just, grab the feed of Usenet as it's coming through, and I'll just look at who's posting the messages. And then I'll capture names, organizations, emails, and things like that, and use that to sort of build that up. And maybe some of my friends will have posted something there. Because, of course, when you're young and naive, you think everybody must be doing the exact same thing as you. I don't think I found anybody, actually, any of the people I went to high school with through that. But then I started expanding this and included lots of other services. It goes on. And one of the really fun stories I like to tell about this particular area was I would also have a bot that would go and sign up for mailing lists. And so the way that would work is I would go and I just locate mailing lists, and then I'd say, okay, here's a mailing list server. A lot of times you'd be able to query them and say, what other mailing lists do you operate on this server? Can you subscribe me to, this one, that one, this one, that one? So I literally had to go subscribe to everything I could find. And at one point I was subscribed to a couple 100,000 mailing lists. And the reason that this was really cool was because you didn't have to do anything. All this email would come in, and I had a bot sit on top of the email box that it came into, and it would literally just pull out again who sent what to who, what's their name, and what organization. And so I used that to start building up this great data. I did run into a couple of problems, which are absolutely the most fun of all. So the first one, I was using the university's resources to do this. And at the time, they had the equivalent of, a T1, right? So 1.5 megabit connection to the world. That got filled up pretty quick. And it was filled up because people are sending emails. So I basically caused the equivalent of a DOS attack against the university. Not intentionally, but, I got a little bit of a slap. And then luckily the dean came and said, hey, I want more students doing that kind of thing, not less of them, right? So I was waiting to get kicked out or whatever, but luckily I didn't.
Oh, that's good leadership, by the way. That's good leadership.
I agree. The second one is very fun. Apparently, I had subscribed to some military-based mailing lists that were somehow open on the net. Again, I wasn't targeting any of this. It was just any mailing list I want to get the emails. And so the Canadian Air Force or equivalent, called the university, hey, you got some guy trying to hack your things. And look, he's talking about all this antivirus stuff on his, on his webpage equivalent and things. This guy's a bad guy. What's going on there? And so again, I got the talking to again of, hey, maybe dial it down a little bit, these types of things.
Kevin, for those of us for those that think AI has been around for a year or two, because that's as long as ChatGPT's been out, you were doing AI 20-something years ago. I mean, that's in a way, right? Very simple but basic bots and automation scripts and things like that. You had created this many years ago. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. I liken it more to actually the sort of web crawl experience, or almost a deep web crawl, more than the AI side. But I have been doing a lot of AI for a long time, and I love your comment. People do think AI is a new thing because of ChatGPT and the Mid-Journeys of the world, et cetera, coming out. But it's really interesting. I still think all of that is really just statistics. So it's if you've been doing statistics, it's not a leap to get yourself into the AI world. It's basically all stats. So it's applied stats. It's interesting. But I don't hear a lot of people recognize how long the AI field's actually been around. It's been around for a long time. Yeah.
Kevin, you're a huge advocate of data. Educate us a little bit about data. You talk a lot about dirty data problems. Why is data important, and how could enterprises, companies, small, large, medium, use it to push their mission ahead, whether it's more sales, it's better customer service, better products? Tell us a little bit about why you think data is so damn important, and what can we do about it to take advantage? Because I've got a lot of data and don't know what to do with it necessarily sometimes.
So it's actually very easy to create data. People do it all the time. Everything you interact with, there's logging that's going on, all these kinds of things. So there's tons of data. Your comment on what to do with it, I think usually you start with the question and then say, can the data answer the question? One of the really interesting parts there, if you look back, again, let's go pre sort of the current AI generation, but if you look back and say, what does a credit score do? The credit score answers a question. Are you going to pay me back? Right? So if you start with that as being your question, then you say, what kind of data do I have that can inform me as to whether or not this person will pay me back? So I like the idea of starting from the question and then say, what data do I need in order to do that? And so as you know, with a credit score, people will say, hey, do they pay their bills on time? Do they have a large outstanding balance? How much, whatever income do they have? These kinds of things. We don't do anything with credit scores, mind you. But, it's one of those things where I think if you sort of look at it from the question side, it becomes easy to know what data would be most interesting. The problem that people have is that a lot of times the data that they think they have is not as good as it needs to be. And I see this all the time. People will come present to us things, and they'll always start with, "Oh, our data is fantastic. We have this great stuff. These are the people who have bought products from us. We know everything we need to know about them." And as soon as you do some just really, really basic analysis, you find there's missing fields, there's typos, there's standardization issues, there's duplicates, there's all sorts of things. And if you start going to try to build a model using data like that, you end up discarding a lot of things that might be good. You end up duplicating things, so you bias your model out in some way, and just overall, the very first part, and I think most people you'd ask, the very most important part of building any model is making sure that the data you have, that you're starting with, is good and robust and has as few biases inside it when you begin. It needs to be closer to a random sample. If you say, here are all the people that purchased something from me, that's great, but what about the people that didn't? Right? So you start ending up with these like little microcosms of, oh, this works, but it only works for this type of thing. And that's why I think we see a lot of this sort of, issue in the data space just popping up all the time. Oh, it didn't work. Oh, it did work. Oh, it only works here. Oh, my stuff's dirty, so I got a bad result back. A lot of it comes back to just prepping and understanding what that data is to begin with. Really, really important.
Kevin, I literally dealt with this last week. So we were building up for a big leadership conference. We put something together here for my own, for my LA leadership team, which was how to 10x their world, right? And it was personal and it was business. But one of the things we were trying to do is, what if you got rid of 80% of your clients tomorrow? What would happen? And one of the things we had to do is a little bit flipped of what you did. First, I got a bunch of data that some other team had done, and they had not done a good job. So guess what happened? The data didn't make any sense. So we had to restart. So that caused a lot of time and delays. Next, instead of saying, let's look at all the clients that we didn't generate any revenue from, I went in a different direction. I said, let's find clients that we did generate revenue from. And then we pulled some data on what it took to get that revenue. And when we presented to the team, people were shocked because they said things like, that's crazy. Because we had generated revenue, we thought that was a decent client. And the data said that was actually a losing proposition. And it's hard to argue with revenue, right? There was one client, we had generated $140,000 in revenue. But when I showed them what it cost, and both emotionally and time and money and resources wise, that it no longer made sense. And I had to remind them, guys, when we look at the lost time and effort, we're talking about humans putting in this loss of effort, right? If it was just a button, who cares, right? At the end of the day, we drove revenue. But one data said that 90% of the work we had done with a client had led to lost or washed jobs, meaning we had done a bunch of recruiting for them and it had led to just the position went away, which means it was just a waste of time and effort. And people were involved in this, both on the candidate side and my recruiting side. So the data really told an incredible story. But we had to start with a question, which was, what client did we generate revenue with that was a losing proposition? And that's how we went about it. I mean, it was really mind-blowing to my staff on how much time and effort was wasted on the wrong clients. I mean, this is how incredible data is.
Sometimes even prepping the data itself is like, that can become an interesting thing. Like, again, most people are familiar with one-hot encoding. But, if you start off and you say, let me use the color of a car to make a prediction of something, maybe whether or not the person speeds, let's say, right? How do you model that? How do you encode that? Like, what kind of blues are there? And so in our world, a lot of times we just turn things into, binary answers, yes, no. So we say, is the car blue? Is the car light blue? Is the car, dark blue? And they may even have percentage answers. It's 20% dark blue and 30% normal blue and, whatever, some percentage black, let's say. So really prepping the data, even if you have good data to begin with, that prepping step is also extremely important to make sure that when you go and start building models, that it makes sense for the type of data that you have. If it's descriptive, then a lot of times things like this one hot encoding is a really, really helpful thing. But on the other hand, if you have numerical data, you can use different types of algorithms to model that type of stuff out. And if it's a continuous function versus discrete, these are my price points. The last thing you want to see is a model that says, hey, charge $9.99 for everything, and you look at it and you're like, we already are. Right? So you want to know, can I charge $19.99, right? Or should I only be charging $7.99? Would that work better? So just looking at the data and really prepping it before you start building models is really the most important aspect of it. Some models also work better with different types of data. So again, specific to our case and what we do a lot of, we find that there's a lot of very weak signals that when you add them all together becomes a strong signal. But individually, each thing it doesn't really answer your question. You need a big group of them together. And so there's algorithms called boosting algorithms. We'll use gradient boosted trees for a lot of work or things like this. They take very large numbers of parameters in, as opposed to maybe 3, 4, 5. We may put 100 or 200 in and see what comes out there. And again, because you have a large number of these sort of weaker indicators or weaker signals, just understanding how the algorithms perform with different types of inputs is also really important, because you can take the same data, model it with different algorithms, and you'll find wildly different, not so much just results, but the confidence or the accuracy, the goodness of what comes out of those models will vary quite a lot.
Besides dirty data, what are some other what are like the biggest data problems you see companies are dealing with, and how does Versium, we can kind of do full circle, how does Versium deal with that? How do you solve these problems?
Yeah, so one of the ones is, you've probably heard the saying, I don't know what I don't know, right? And so with the sort of death of third-party cookies coming, the advertising world, especially online, is struggling a bit with understanding who are their customers in the first place. So in sort of nerd speak, you would call it secondary external data. We like to call it just third-party data appends. But being able to identify a user in your data set, again, it could be a client, it could be a prospect, it could be whatever, just somebody that you know something about. Is there a way that I can add additional information that maybe you don't know, that I know, that would help inform your model? These can be really, really basic things, right? It could be like, hey, have they bought a car in the past 30 days? Yes or no? Like, you have no idea. What kind of car did they buy? How many cylinders does it have? How often did they flip their car? Did they buy a luxury car? Did they buy an economy car? Did they buy a sports car? What color was it? You start thinking about all this, and in your mind, you're probably thinking, well, I don't care what kind of car they bought. But what if it turns out that there's actually a signal that correlates strongly with some purchase propensity that you have? I'm sure you've heard already, that's fairly well published, right, that like the iPhone users tend to spend more money than non-iPhone users. And so a lot of e-commerce sites will bump up prices if they determine you're surfing them on an iPhone. Wow. Same with a Mac. And so there's like little quirky things like that. But you would, if you didn't know to look at it, if you didn't even look at it in the first place, then you wouldn't have been able to find that out. This is pretty widely published. So if you search around, you'll see all sorts of articles about that.
That's amazing. So Kevin, basically, if I'm a car manufacturer, a car dealer, I might look at John and say, you know what, John's below my spending budget. He's not going to be able to afford a Porsche. But then you say, wait a minute. If you look at the data, the last 6 cars he's purchased, each time he's spending 15% more. He must be on his way up. We are right there in the 15% range. So he could be a customer, right? This is typically someone I would skip, is not in our budget, don't advertise, don't waste your money, but maybe it's a lost opportunity there. Would that be a good use case?
It's fantastic. Actually, we did a study sort of like what you just described. And the question was, I got to be a little careful with some of the names here. There's a luxury car manufacturer, which everybody's heard of, that's out there. And the question is, what kind of car do they have in their garage before they purchase one of ours? And we went down the list, and we did some analysis, and we came up with another car that's very unlike this particular. This is a sports car that I'm referring to, and the car that they have in their garage is not a sports car. It's an SUV. But if they own that SUV, the chance that they're going to purchase this sports car in the next 3 years, it's like 80%. It's pretty high.
Interesting.
Yeah, there's some weird.
So they're
weird
done
things
with
like
their
that.
gigantic Yukon, and they've raised their kids, and now they want a sports car. Let's go, Porsche, right?
Something like that.
Yeah. That's brilliant. You're right, because then otherwise it's, this person's had 3 SUVs in a row. They're going to buy another SUV. Let's bow out of this customer race. That's crazy. Nice. Okay. So you feel like, these boosting algorithms help solve some of these data problems?
They do. They do. Again, you really need to look at things, from what is the question that I'm trying to answer, and then what data do I have, or what data might, help inform an answer there, and then what's the algorithm that works best with the type of data I have and the way that I can represent it. And that's really our approach to things. We're very good at modeling our own data, so when we add it to someone else's data, that becomes pretty easy for us.
Kevin, you sound like a very technical CTO. If you're speaking to a slightly less technical CTO, or maybe they're technical, but they've been more on the people management side, what are challenges and what are some essential principles of software architecture that leaders should understand to be able to create the right vision and hold their teams accountable? I know it's a pretty deep question, but what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So first off, I love this question. And I sometimes will jokingly, even with my own team, jokingly say, I'm a terrible CTO because I don't always embrace the flavor of the day. I am, in many ways, kind of an old school, like, it needs to work. I'd rather know how 5 technologies work absolutely from the start to the finish, and every little quirk they have, every configuration option, and very deep knowledge on a small number of technologies, than have a whole smorgasbord of, 1,000 different, who knows what's in a bunch of different places. And then we just spend our time connecting all these components together. And this, in many ways, again, I get a lot of pushback, especially from engineers, because everybody wants to work on the latest and greatest new thing. And the problem that I see is that a lot of times you just get a repackaging of something that already exists. Like, I give you a really basic example. If you go look through all the different computer languages that have popped out, some of which are very, very popular now, and you say, what does this language do? Fundamentally, what can I do in this language that I cannot do in another language? Now, there might be a library or something that helps you get it done, but they're almost all the same at the end of the day. It's not like if I program this in Python versus program it in Java versus program it in C, it may take me longer in C, right? And I may not have the libraries that I need in order to do it, but the output, the inputs and outputs, it's still going to be the same stuff. And so they're like, I struggle with some of these things, especially when people will say, hey, I want to go use, this new thing over here because it solves this problem for me. And I look at it and I'm like, gosh, okay, it does solve that problem, but can't we solve it with the tools we already have? Like, I'd rather have that expertise in a small number than have lots and lots of these and have the expertise scattered all over the place, right? If that person leaves, or if there's a change to the technology, or perhaps it deprecates out, now you have some legacy thing that's sitting around, lying around, and you're like, gosh, I don't know if I can count on that, or how long can I count on that? And it can create a lot of problems down the road. Again, sort of that smorgasbord of technologies, and you're like, what's the middleware to connect them?
I actually disagree with what you said about you're a terrible CTO because, frankly, you don't chase shiny toys. I think you're a great CTO and a very mature and a business-minded CTO who knows that, look, technology is the tools you use. The programming language or the database is the tools you use to solve business problems. So I think with engineers, I think a lot of times they're just interested in playing with what's a marketable skill set. Let's just be honest, right?
Yes.
So if Golang is highly popular right now, I want my organization to allow me to use Golang so I can learn it and become more marketable. It's understandable, but that's not what the business is interested in. The business is interested in solving problems. And while Golang might be great at solving one problem, it could create additional problems that Python is a better use for, right? And so I think that's great. And even for the engineer, I think that teaches them maturity. It allows them to understand, look, we like to experiment, sure, but we've got some real business problems to solve here, and we could do the same thing in C++ that we were doing in Golang. So let's not go there, right? So I think that's a very mature approach. Here's another one. I know you enjoy working with business users as well as technical folks. How do you bridge the gap? Again, sometimes on the opposite end, the business doesn't know what it takes. They call you IT guys. Hey, you're IT guys, we're paying all this money for, figure it out. And sometimes the expectations aren't reasonable. What do you love about it? How do you communicate between the two and make everybody happy?
Yeah, so one of my superpowers, if you will, is I can, a lot of times, especially if I have a very deep knowledge of something, I can distill it down into very practical, relatable terms. I wouldn't necessarily say, teaching like, but I think one of the things that I do a pretty good job of is take those complicated topics and simplify them down so that they're understandable without having all the technical mumbo jumbo that sits behind it. Now, obviously, you should ask me for an example. I don't have one to give you right now, but I'm sure somewhere through here we'll come up with something. But I do feel that, again, distilling these complicated problems into like, well, here's actually what it does, and sort of layman's terms is a really important thing for being able to essentially sell that technology to the non-technical people.
I like it. What was the inspiration behind Versium and its mission to turn data into strategic assets? We talked about how important data is, but how does Versium specifically deal with this, and why was it created?
Yeah, so it's a very entertaining history, actually. So as you mentioned already, I was CTO and one of the founders of Intellius. Intellius does background checks. It had also an employment screening division called TalentWise. I think that's getting close to your space, so you would probably know about that. Both of those were sold off to other entities. They still exist, but again, I have no involvement there. One of the things, though, was, you see all this data coming through that's used for background checks, mostly finding people or finding dirt on people, or, maybe the trucking company wants to hire a driver. They want to make sure they don't have a DUI or, who knows what. So you see all of this type of data, and you're basically, in the simplest terms, using it to dig up dirt on people or see if there's any dirt that could be dug up, and make sure that things are all right. While I'm, appreciative of the value of that, especially in some industries, one of the things that became apparent was, there's a lot of other things you could do with data like this that has nothing to do with, just digging up dirt. Like it could be, are these good people for dating sites, or, just a whole wide swath of different applications outside of that space. And one of the ones that jumped out was, wow, you could use a lot of this for, advertising related things or marketing related things. But a lot of that has been sort of hidden away in two places. One, you have these advertising agencies or marketing agencies that are out there, and they've been doing this for a long, long time. And they actually, a lot of the bigger ones, they have some fantastic statisticians. So you can go in and ask them all sorts of great questions, and they have actually very good answers. It is, to me, it was a little surprising, given a lot of them aren't necessarily computery people. They were really more mathematicians or statisticians. Even if you look at insurance companies like an actuary, they're basically statisticians, right? And they do a very good job. The other place where it's kind of hidden away are these ad networks, the Googles, the Facebooks, all these kinds of guys. And essentially, if you go buy ads, you don't know how they decide to serve which ad to who, right? You have no idea. You don't know who's going to actually see your ad today. I want to buy the keyword, whatever, hiring people. Okay, great. You have no idea who sees it. They decide for you. So again, you don't really see any of that. And what the real genesis of Versium was we had done some work with I'll just call it a Groupon-like service that had, a deal of the day. And the question was, could I find the best people to send the deal of the day to that was better than just sending it to everybody? And the answer was yes. And it became very, very clear. We did some experimentation really early on. We got like a 60% better ratio of number of sends to actual purchases than what was going on if you just blanketed it everywhere. And so that says, hey, if you add some of this targeting information, you could do a much better job, and you don't have to spam as much in these offers that are going out. And so that was essentially the genesis of Versium. It was, hey, can we use data to inform not just models, but just inform anyone about their audience, and then help them find that audience better. And so even today, if you go look at some of our services that have nothing to do with modeling data for somebody else, like our identity graph, for example, will associate a business identity with a consumer identity. And while that doesn't sound very interesting to most people, when I distill it like this, you'll get it right away. How often do you log into Amazon with a business domain, or do you use your Gmail or Hotmail? The answer is you use your Gmail or your Hotmail. Well, I assume, right? That's what everybody does. So when COVID came around, everybody started to suddenly look like they were consumers, and nobody looked like they were business users. However, our identity graph yes, and our identity graph is able to make those associations of, hey, Joe at corporation is the same as Joe at Gmail. So now I'm able to connect. Now that I'm able to connect those two things, I can still advertise to the Joe at corporation, but I can advertise to him using his consumer identity, right? Using the Joe at Gmail. And so things like that are built using modeling we have internally and data that we collect up. You just want the output of it. You just want the connectivity. And what that does, because if you go and try to onboard those emails at a Facebook or a Google, you're going to get a very low rate of onboarding. Usually it's in the 10 to 15% range for just a straight up B2B list. And so when we're able to associate those consumer identities, that shoots way up. You can see it as high as 80, 90% all of a sudden. And so those kinds of things are just enabling you with data you already have, customers you already have, but enabling you to advertise to them in more places than you were able to before. And so that's a really, really valuable thing.
That is very valuable. In fact, Kevin, I'd love to know more about your service, maybe for our club. You never know. You're an author of several patents. Can you tell us a little bit about like your favorite one really quickly? Like what's one you're really proud of?
Wow. So there is one actually so I think this patent I think they've all kind of, hit the cliff. I don't remember what it is, like 17 years or 20 years or something like this, but I think most of them have sort of passed that. But my favorite one is actually something you probably see everywhere all over the place. And this was using email to change a database record based on some request. So it is very generic if you look this up. So essentially, you go to maybe a website, or even today you go to a website or use an app on your phone or whatever, you type some stuff in and it says, oh, we need to verify your identity. Please go check this email. We sent you an email. Please click the link in the email to confirm who you are. So one of my original patents covers essentially that mode of operation. That was originally owned by InfoSpace. I'm not sure where it landed, but that one's definitely at the top of the list of like, everybody does that. I mean, it's everywhere.
It's huge. I love the fact that a bot is asking me if I'm a bot, and then when I say I'm not a bot, then it asks me, "Are you sure? Prove it to me." I'm like, "Are you serious right now?"
Yeah.
I've literally given up. So that's cool, man. You should be proud of that. So I'm guessing millions of people are using that.
Oh yeah, it's everywhere. Again, I think the patent has expired, so I don't think you could enforce it even if you owned it now. But at the time, and at least at InfoSpace, we only did patents for defensive purposes. We never went on offense, and asserted them against anybody.
Nice.
But we had some pretty interesting ones. Another one that maybe not quite as obvious, but relates to geographical searching, where actually Nielsen in particular has defined from way long ago these areas called direct marketing areas, and a DMA is essentially where broadcast television stations, what they're covering ranges. So, your local station has whatever the people are that it broadcasts to. And those geographies are unusual shapes. And so, like one of these patents actually covers converting a non-DMA query into one to perform this sort of search in a more broad way that's not like as the crow flies radius, right? Because if you go and say, I want a 50-mile radius around something, and there's a lake right next to it, you're searching a lot of the lake that you don't care about. You may have a geography that's very tall and very thin. The radius doesn't work there either. So being able to transpose into these other shapes for where that search occurs is very interesting. And given that there used to be lots of marketing tied around these DMAs, that was very, very useful at the time.
Maybe that's why I have so many fish subscribing to the Tech Leaders Playbook. We use the lake thing. I knew it. You understand AI probably in a deep way. I know you're not an AI expert, but you understand it. What are the challenges and promises of the AI revolution in helping in the data technology world? Like, what's one that you're seeing as serious and something that could make an impact?
There's one that's actually very, very serious that probably already is making an impact in a bad way, which is, it used to be that when you get that phishing email, it was pretty easy to tell that it was a phishing email. And I think that's going to continue to get more and more difficult as you find the bad actors start using AI to improve their ability to coerce you into doing something that you ought not do. So I'm nervous in that area. That includes, I see these things all the time where people will send us emails. Oh, please pay this bill, transfer money over here. Can you just forward that to accounts payable? And you're like, what? Like, this isn't even from us. I mean, come on. Well,
we get that daily. People pretending they're me, asking people to send phone numbers so then they can start saying, hey, do you mind? I'm in a meeting. I need you to buy two Amazon gift certificates, $500 each. Please, we could talk later. People have fallen for it. No joke.
Yeah. No, I know.
People,
it's a big deal.
I mean, I was on the phone with Amazon making sure my employee got their refund. I mean, it was insane.
Yeah. No, trust me. I see this stuff also all the time. That, I think, is going to get more and more difficult. And a big part of the problem there, when you go back and you look at, again, the internet and its, creation, and even, I'll even call it the web as we know it today, less internet, there's not a whole lot of security built into it. And so people keep throwing in layers of security. But the one that doesn't really seem to have figured it out is email, right? Email, I think it's RFC 822, came out in, 1982, 1983, something like this. There's nothing built in there really for security, right? And so people, again, they keep layering stuff on top of it, but that's still a pretty big problem. Just identity is actually a big problem. Are you actually who you claim to be, right? I got an email that says you're somebody, or I get a text that says you're somebody. Are you actually that person? That's a really big problem. And I think AI is going to actually make that easier for bad actors to trick people into thinking it is correct, because now you can have a discussion with them. Oh, I don't know what you're talking about, right? Maybe it's hey, your Netflix account's going to be canceled. You got to click this link and pay. You're like, if you don't know what that is, you're like, no, I think I paid it. Oh no, it shows here on, account, blah, 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 date, blah, blah, blah. You still owe, blah, blah, blah. You must pay now, right? You can start interacting with them, and you may get a more convincing, realistic response back that could confuse you or cause you to do something that you ought not do.
Wow. How does someone reach you, whether it's for the sake of Versium and the amazing work that you guys do, or just to pick your brain? How do people reach you?
I'm pretty easy to find out there. LinkedIn is a fantastic facility. Don't call me. If you call my phone, it's going to say you're an unknown caller. It's not going to ring. It just goes into, literally, I have this list. I'm sure I can put it up here of just, I should be a little careful here with the names of people, but you can see it's essentially, all these red numbers that are, there. These are basically people calling that I don't even know they called.
Non-stop.
Yeah, I don't have voicemail, so don't leave me voicemail, any of these things. Email works pretty well. LinkedIn is a great one. Email also works great. I get zillions of emails. I think I've got 200,000 or 300,000 unreads somewhere in here. Just my work email box, I got 33,000 unreads. But I do a great job.
Come on, Kevin, you got to read every one of those emails. No.
Let's
set a goal. By the end of today, we're going to get all those emails read.
No way. But I do a very good job of finding the ones that I need in there.
I bet.
Yeah. So email works fantastic for me as well.
There it is. Kevin, you've been great, man. Any thoughts you can leave us with for the next time?
Yeah, well, the world's a big place. We got a lot of interesting technologies that are coming out. AI, again, to your point earlier, everybody's seen the ChatGPTs of the world. We've done some interesting experiments there in the marketing space to see how that goes. Some of them are good, some of them are bad. I don't think it's quite the panacea that everybody seems to think that it is, but I think there's going to be a lot of additional developments there, and it's going to continue to improve. The most important part of that is, do you have, again, enough data in your first-party data warehouse that allows you to use those technologies and actually get some value out of them? Or do you have to rely on somebody else to do that? So I think we're going to see a lot more of that, especially as, again, we get closer to the cookie death. Again, I think it just puts more reliance on those first-party data holders to really understand what they're doing, and I think you're going to see a lot more of that type of activity.
Kevin, one question I almost forgot to ask. I ask every CTO, what's your favorite programming language and why? And what's one that drives you crazy and why?
Oh, you're killing me. All right. So I'll answer, but don't laugh. So my favorite programming language is actually PHP. And the reason, I saw that look. The reason is because it's basically the equivalent of interpretive C or C++. You can write it just like that. It's pretty simple. You can actually extend it very easily with modules if you need to. If you have something that needs to run really quick, it's very easy to extend PHP with C++ modules. So you make a function call that actually goes and calls your C++ module. So definitely my favorite. And again, mostly just because of that sort of C background. Least favorite, I know I'm going to get slapped on this too, is definitely Python. I absolutely abhor Python, and I don't think it should ever exist. The only reason that it's around as a language in my mind is because somebody created some very good machine learning libraries for it. Had they written those in some other language, the other language would have been the thing. And I don't like the syntax. I don't like how slow it is. It's terrible for string handling. It's just got people that use Python forget about the system that it's running on and take sort of this approach of, I can just, I'll scale it up and down as appropriate. And they take a very wasteful approach to how they do things. And again, as we discussed at the beginning of this, I still appreciate bits, right? I still appreciate code that is elegant and runs quickly and does what it needs to do efficiently. So that's why Python's at the bottom of my list.
Wow, that was a huge surprise. So funny enough, if you look at my last podcast with Douglas Squirrel, he talked about PHP as his favorite technology, and specifically why. It had to do with how quickly you can create a button to experiment with whether customers want it or not. I thought that was very interesting. And I've never heard a data-driven CTO who's all about data hate on Python. So that one was surprising. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I know.
What a cool one. So appreciate having you, man. Enjoyed it. I will see you next time. Hopefully when you're in LA, we can grab dinner or something.
Awesome. That'd be great.
And that brings us to the end of another great episode of the Tech Leaders Playbook. I want to thank you for joining us and hope you took away some valuable insights to apply in your professional journey. Don't forget to subscribe on your preferred podcast platform so you don't miss out on the next great conversation. I promise it'll be good. If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd appreciate if you could leave us a review. Your feedback not only helps us improve, but also help others discover the podcast. Better leaders mean better working environments. Better working environments leads to happier people. I'm Avetis Antaplyan, and this has been the Tech Leaders Playbook. Keep leading, keep learning, keep giving, and I'll see you on the next one. Until then, stay inspired, my friends.